The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1900. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1900, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to natural resources, proposing an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution, the second engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins, to explain House File 1900.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill for the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. This trust fund has helped fund important projects to conserve our land, air, water, and wildlife across the state of Minnesota for the last 3 decades. It's my honor to carry this bill, and I'm delighted to bring it to the floor today. The fund was created in 1988 with the overwhelming support of voters, and it was rededicated after a decade with also tremendous voter support. And once again, it's time to reauthorize this dedicated funding by putting the question before the voters in 2024. There are a couple of changes that have been made to the bill in this iteration that I would like to describe for you. We have increased the percentage of the fund that may be appropriated from 5.5% to 7%, and this investment returns on the fund are adequate to support this increase without depleting the fund, and increasing the percentage will allow more dollars to get out the door and to fund good projects across the state of Minnesota. Additionally, language has been added to prohibit the use of these funds to pay for wastewater infrastructure. In the past, attempts to utilize this fund to pay bonds for wastewater projects caused controversy and delay in appropriating funds. Research related to wastewater may still be funded through the trust fund, but wastewater infrastructure is more appropriately funded through bonding. Adding this language in the Constitution will prohibit future raids on the trust fund for wastewater projects. And then finally, Article 2 contains statutory changes that add a community grants program in order to create more accessibility for communities and organizations across the state. The community grants program does not change the current LCCMR process or the amounts of funds that the LCCMR recommends. This small grants program will be administered by the DNR and includes an advisory council that will be charged with the task of advising the DNR on developing and improving the grant program to ensure accessibility. There's broad support for this constitutional amendment and statutory community grants program, as you can see from the support letter that will be distributed or may have already been distributed. Over 90 organizations have signed on to support it. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File number 1900, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson, to explain the A9 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The addition of the small grants program to this bill reveals a new way of funding projects across the state. But there's language in here regarding subgrants. It's not clear whether they intend to issue any subgrants, but in the interest of clarity and consistency and accountability, I think it's important that we not do subgrants, that all grants be directly administered and awarded by the DNR. This amendment simply removes the language regarding subgrants to make it perfectly clear that there's no intention to use subgrants as part of this program. I urge members to vote green.
Further discussion to the A9 amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Torkelson. I actually agree. This language was a holdover from boilerplate language that had been used previously when we thought subgrants were going to be a part of the program, but now we're recognizing that's not the best way to administer the funds, and so I would also support a green vote on removing this language, so thank you.
Is there any further discussion to the A9 amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. Please vote green.
All those in favor of adopting the A9 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the A9 amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File number 1900, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson, to explain the A10 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is going so well, I'm thinking I maybe should have worn green today. but I didn't. So for those of you that have been here a while, 2020 and earlier, you may remember Gene Wagenius. Gene and I served on environment together, on LCCMR together, and disagreed most of the time. However, she often used the term outcomes, and this is a point where we did agree that the money spent in these programs, whether it be LCCMR or other grant programs, actually result in something important, something that actually has a positive impact on our environment. The language of this amendment simply inserts that language into this community grants program so that it gives us some assurance that once this money is spent, we get some positive outcomes for our environment. Mr. Speaker and members, I urge a green vote.
Further discussion to the A10 amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again, Representative Torkelson, although I'm afraid we're going to not agree on this one. We're going so well. I know. While I do appreciate the efforts, and I think we had a good conversation about this in committee, I'm going to advise my members to vote no on this language, not because I don't think what you're saying is important, but because I think the language that you provided just needs a little bit of tweaking, and because this is statutory in nature, I'm happy to continue working with you to get language right on this and amend it going forward in 2024. So I also would like to note that we can absolutely expect the DNRs to have a reporting process on what ends up coming out of these community grant programs. I do truly believe that because a lot of what happens with these trust fund monies is research, a positive outcome is not really a useful descriptor because research doesn't have positive and negative outcomes, it just has outcomes and empirical data. And we really want to have that empirical data. So I want to work on this language with you, Representative Torkelson, and I hope that you will agree to do that with me later. But for now, I would recommend a no vote. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A10 amendment. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since there's a very small issue with this amendment, and I'm sure that the author of the amendment, the author of the bill, could sit down and take care of that now. We could table this bill, take up the next one, and you could come up with an amendment and fix it now. I just have concerns that if we don't fix it now, we might not get to it. And you're so close, it sounds like, on agreement that I'm sure that would happen, but I'm not going to make any motion. I'm just adding that suggestion to the author.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Torkelson. This is a good amendment, and you know, this is a bill that everybody, I think, wants to support, and one of the problems that we have on that side of the aisle is that we just always seem to go just a little bit too far. And, you know, it's not that we're, you know, we can go down the examples of those things, but, you know, this is brand new. We're going to increase the amount of money that we're going to spend in Minnesota by over 20%. That's great. You know, that's great. If that's what we want to do, that's great. But what we're doing, and what's really important, and I'm going to spend a little time in section lines 3.16 to 3.21. If you want to look at the bill, I may have some questions. But, you know, we started out, for example, trying to protect the U of M, and we ended up regulating every health transaction. There has to be some end to what the good is. And this bill and this, you know, this constitutional amendment is supported by 70% of the state of Minnesota. This is great. But when we get down into lines 3.16 to 3.21, I mean, even on the first one, census tracts that are overburdened and underserved. I mean, that's an EPA. That's an EPA designation for environmental justice, which is fine. That's great. But let's just list them. I mean, they're identified in maps, just like a wetland conservation map, just like anything else that we study at a high level. Let's just identify those areas and say, you know what, those are the target areas we're going to go to. We're going to go to Brooklyn Park. We're going to go to Brooklyn Center. We're going to go to North Minneapolis. We're going to go to South Minneapolis. Let's identify those things and be super transparent about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then you get into including communities disproportionately affected by agricultural loss. Now, is that, how long are we going back? Are we going to go back to 1965, Shakopee? Are we going to, building loss, fire risk, low incomes, high energy costs, rates of asthma, rates of diabetes. I mean, Minnesota, 8.8% of Minnesotans have diabetes, 390,000 people. They're not all congregated in the environmental justice areas targeted by the EPA. They're all over. So we're trying to carve out literally 22% of new funding for certain areas that predominantly have lost all kinds of diversity. These are high densely populated areas. I don't know a lot of the metro. I know Hennepin. For example, you know, we've got 11 watershed management organizations in watershed districts. They would be eligible for this. I think this is great. That's great that they would be eligible for this increased funding. But they're already doing that work. They're already doing that work, and we're not celebrating that. We're basically saying, now what we want you to do, forget about your comprehensive planning that you're taking up. We want you now to hone in on where the EPA has identified areas that are environmentally unjust. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake. Natural resources, they go far beyond political subdivisions and boundaries of wealth or non-wealth. High housing costs. Does that mean, I don't know where the highest housing costs are. Let's just say the brand new North Loop. I heard those are pretty expensive. Are they gonna be better qualified to receive these dollars than the city of Greenfield? Because it's cheaper? This is so vague, and it reaches so far that it just creates this thing, and I can get into it a little bit at the end of it, but it reaches so far when we're really trying to focus on what are those things that matter. And lack of indoor plumbing. Can we, I don't know, maybe you've got an example of where they don't have indoor plumbing. I think maybe we have one. Presence of lead paint. In Hennepin County, we spend millions of dollars to remediate lead paint. Does that mean that Hennepin County is going to be a stronger participant in this process because we invest and we have identified so much lead paint? Would that make Hennepin County better? Proximity to hazardous waste and related facilities. Does that mean that a refuse-derived energy fuel site is gonna score higher? I don't know. This section right here. This section right here it's just wrong. If we're going to increase the amount of money, I wish we'd have had an amendment to get rid of Section 3, because there was nothing wrong with the way that we were doing this before. All of these things that are targeted in this group were eligible for funding before. If we wanted to increase that, you know what, let's partner with those people that are providing those things now. Let's not create a whole new organization where they don't even have any recommendation components. They're literally there to try to advise the commissioner on developing forms and applications, reporting, review proposed grant policies and budgets, propose changes to the grant program, review other relevant information. They're not even being tapped to help decide where those funds are going. Who wants to sit on a committee like that? I wish this is a good amendment, because it basically takes the vagueness of this and puts an outcome that's associated with it that says, you know what, I lost my amendment. We're going to basically take this vague, very open thing, and we're going to focus to make sure that we've got measurable, positive results that protect, conserve, preserve, and enhance the state's air, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. Because that's the constitutional requirement of this funding. This is a no-brainer. This is a good amendment. This doesn't hurt anything. There's nothing to work on. This is a good amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to House File 1900. I recognize the author of the bill, the member. Is there any further discussion to the A10 amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. Would Representative Hollins yield for a question?
She will yield, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hollins, which committees did this bill get heard in?
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, I believe that it was heard in Environment, Rules, and Ways and Means.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surprisingly, that no accountability language added in any of those committees. Representative Nadeau brought out some important points here. And the language we're adding, while it may not be, quote, perfect, it surprises me because we've passed a lot of language this session. And I would argue that there are many imperfections, whether it be challenging constitutional law or other aspects of law. My feeling is we're going to be doing a lot of repair work come next session. I'm happy to work on this, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't put it in the bill now to assure that these funds are focused on what LCCMR and what these funds from the lottery are supposed to be focused on. If you see the language that's going on the ballot, we're making it very clear to citizens what they're voting for, that these funds would be focused on these things, and the language of the amendment really reflects the language of the constitutional change, and therefore I believe it's important that this language be included, and I again ask members to vote green, and Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call.
Representative Torkelson requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote on the A10 amendment. Is there any further discussion? Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Torkelson. I'm a little shocked saying there's no accountability when we were just in committee and there were several members of your side of the aisle that commended us on the accountability measures and the fiscal responsibility measures that are included in this bill. We have a clawback provision, a reporting provision. We worked really hard with the Department of Natural Resources to make sure that we are being as fiscally responsible as possible with this money. One thing I will note is if you look at the original Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund language, it might be the LCCMR language, I'm sorry. It actually has a similar provision to what you're suggesting, but it does leave out the word positive. It says measurable results. And so that's really what I'm trying to get at, is we can show results from this, but I think the word positive is an unnecessary qualifier that doesn't actually get at the heart of what we're trying to do with this funding, which much of it is research, and research doesn't have positive or negative results, it just has results. That's a fundamental aspect of science, and it's something that is very important to me as a former researcher, and it's something that I think we would not want to codify, saying that there needs to be positive results when we can't necessarily determine when a result is positive or negative. So again, I would ask for a no vote, but I understand where you're coming from, and you truly do have my guarantee that I will work on this with you. This is not going into effect, if it passes, until 2025, and so we have time to do this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, I don't need to repeat myself, but there's nothing wrong with putting this language in at this time. It assures us that we're headed in the right direction. I'm happy to continue working on it, as is the author of the bill, but there's no reason we shouldn't put this in to make sure we start down the right path. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
The clerk will take the roll on the A10 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail and the A10 amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended.
Third reading, House File Number 1900, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to House File 1900 as amended. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, it is so fitting that on Statehood Day, we are discussing a bill that will fund and enhance something that we all know makes us special, our environment. And just like our environment, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund is special, which is why every member should vote green today to keep these special programs going that are present in each of our communities. When the ENRTF was created in 1988, Minnesota led the nation in meaningful conservation and natural resources management. For one of, if not the first times in U.S. history, voters came together to set aside and dedicate state funds for the protection of our environment. In doing so, a generation of Minnesotans decided to pass on that tradition of stewardship to their children. And with House File 1900, we have the chance to do the same and carry that torch to our children. By passing this bill, the wonderful work of the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota's Resources, or LCCMR, can continue to allocate proceeds from our lottery unchanged. The goal of the ENRTF is simple. It's an opportunity to safeguard long-term consistent funding for our environment from short-term mindset of our politics. And over 3 decades and 3 landside constitutional amendments, Minnesota voters have helped achieve that goal. Since its creation, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund has provided over $900 million for over 1,800 natural resource projects across our state, reaching every single county in Minnesota. The trust fund has protected our state from invasive species, funding research and management programs, addressing emerald ash borer, aquatic invasives, agriculture pests, plant and animal diseases, and more. The trust fund has also protected our state's natural areas and habitats. It has funded public, private, and nonprofit habitat conservation and preserving, restored, and enhanced our wetlands, lakes, prairies, forests, and rivers. This work includes projects like the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plants and Pest Center at the University of Minnesota, which helps our state create better management policies on natural and agricultural lands. This work includes projects like our local parks, trails, natural area grant programs, and funding grants for local recreation and conservation in communities from St. Joseph to St. Paul, Prior Lake to Crane Lake, Minneapolis to Marshall, and War Road to Winona. The trust fund has protected our ability to use and enjoy the great outdoors, funding environmental education, naturalist courses, and accessible recreation infrastructure so we can all play outside. This work includes projects that I love and I know that you all love too, like the Voyageurs National Park and Boundary Waters Area Canoe Access resources, so all of us can go outside and enjoy these treasures that people from across the country are so envious of. One project near and dear to my heart and my home that was funded recently by the ENRTF was the reintroduction of endangered and native mussels to the Mississippi River here in northeast Minneapolis. Mussels are critical for our aquatic ecosystems as they filter water and restore our native natural and restore our actual stream bed that our Mississippi River had before it was changed by industry. It also creates habitat for other native fish, plants, and animals. My community in Minneapolis was a very industrial area, but now that river has been closed by the closure of the Locken Dam. So thanks to the ENRTF and thanks to the voters of Minnesota, we now have a beautiful and restored riverbed for every Minnesotan to enjoy. These projects are vital to our environment, our communities, and our constituents. They matter for the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the parks we play in. And these projects will continue when we pass House File 1900 and when our voters overwhelmingly approve this amendment next year. I'm also excited by the prospect of these community grants for an additional 1.5% of the trust fund going towards expanding access for these projects across Minnesota. Like so many of you, I have heard from organizations that have a really hard time applying for these grants. And by setting aside these community grants, we know that we can expand this access so that people who have never had an opportunity to benefit from the great outdoors can continue to do so. I'm also excited to know that the LCCMR process, which has recommended these ENRTF projects for decades, will continue to receive 5.5% of the trust fund every year, carrying on that important tradition of conservation. This is a good bill that expands and maintains our stewardship of the places we love. And when this fund was put on the ballot in 1988, the vote was unanimous. So let's have another green vote today as the President of Minnesota on our state's 155th birthday. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I get up to support the renewal, and thank you, Leader Hollins, for working on this. It's so important for Minnesota. Just able to do amazing work with these funds in the natural and environmental resources area. As was just mentioned, it's amazing. 1,800 projects through the last few years. I think this year there was 85 projects. And I was glad that Leader Hollins mentioned, I was lucky to serve on this 2 years, and it was, and what she mentioned is so true. There was projects that you wouldn't normally fund, but really make a lot of sense. I remember there was one, for example, a project that worked with, I think it was Mounds View kids, something with getting turtles, you know, across the street. It sounds like not important. You probably wouldn't fund it in other ways, but it was working with the kids, and I thought it was really a great way to fund it with these lottery proceeds. And I remember at the same time there was an energy project, because there's a, believe it or not, there's a problem in Minnesota with cattails, invasive cattails, and one of the projects went after that, and it tried to turn through the University of Minnesota, and was going to try to turn that into energy. And actually, I should look into it to see how that went. I'm kind of quite curious. But there's just examples of that are really great projects that you wouldn't really fund in traditional ways, and this makes a lot of sense, really it does. There's, you know, this fund, you know, works so well with the other funds that we work on. The environmental bill, as that comes through this body, does a lot of these outdoor work. So does the Capital Investment Committee, and so, of course, as you know, the chair of the legacy, there's a lot of synergy with the work that we do. And so it's great use of these lottery funds, and I think it's great. Thank you, Leader Hollins, for working on this. It's so important for Minnesota, and it's definitely making for a better Minnesota, and I appreciate it if you would consider voting green on this.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I have a couple of comments I wanted to make, maybe a couple questions, but I'm going to not refer this go back to committee. I have a feeling I know how that would go, but there are a number of things that do need to be discussed today. The positives, we've heard a few of those. I have a few of those stories of my own. I've served on the LCCMR for previously 2 terms, another term again now. And I've carried the LCCMR bill in the past. I do know the typical projects that are there, and some of them that are close to my own district that I've worked on and supported, like the Loon Center in Cross Lake, that's moving forward. And there's a lot of value there for Minnesotans who are looking for something, not just in one small area of the state, but quite honestly, all across the state. There's been projects that have benefited probably every one of our districts. There is an unfortunate side of this discussion today, and Representative Hollins, you made a comment earlier, I'm going to bring it back for the discussion, that there's been a change to the renewal that will stop future raids for wastewater. And I want to talk about that for a minute. And anybody that's at home, take notes maybe. This might help you understand some of the minutia that's in legislation as it comes to the legislature and what it might mean. And this issue particularly is quite interesting to me, because right now in our Constitution, as it was previously passed, it starts out, a permanent environment and natural resources trust fund is established in the state treasury. Loans may be made for up to 5% of the principal of the fund for water system improvements as provided by law. That's not in this renewal today, Representative Hollins, and I know you know that. I'm just mentioning this for the benefit of the body, and like I said, anybody that might be watching at home. Why wouldn't that be there? I think that comment earlier that we heard, we're going to stop future raids for wastewater, is the impetus behind that. That's my opinion. That's maybe somebody else has a different opinion. They'd like to change or challenge that. But it does need to be pointed out that when Minnesotans are polled about the environment, natural resources area, the #1 subject of concern for them is clean water. And maybe we've forgotten those that were in a position to renew this, carrying the legislation or on a conference committee or in committees as this has been moving through the process. I've mentioned it a number of times. I'm not sure why it hasn't been taken more seriously, but maybe some have forgotten that every day in Minnesota, millions of gallons of cleaned, not perfectly cleaned, but cleaned wastewater is discharged into tributaries around the state of Minnesota. That includes the Mississippi and numerous others. As I'm looking across the room, I see most members are buried in their phones as I'm having to mention this today. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Representative Fraser. Why can't we continue to allow Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund money to be used as the Constitution currently states? That would be my question. I have to ask that today, and I'm befuddled as to why, when Minnesotans' #1 concern could be addressed in this new language, Representative Hollins, that is not happening. It's being pushed to the side because we have to stop future raids for wastewater. And I understand there's a discussion about where might be the most appropriate way to fund some of these projects as it relates to wastewater infrastructure around the state, but this is one tool that could be used, and that's being taken away. A tool that could address Minnesotans' #1 priority. That's my comments today, and I wish that I could be voting yes today. I guess I'm still somewhat undecided, but I'm probably going to be a no for this reason, because we've missed an opportunity. Yeah, I'm sorry, Representative Lilly. I know you were holding out hope, but we've missed an opportunity again. Democrats, for some reason, are ignoring this issue. I think that Minnesotans believe front and center, when polled, #1 issue, clean water, could be addressed in this renewal of the ENRTF, and that's not happening today.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Nicollet, Representative Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise today to show my support for this renewal of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund as well, because I think this is really critical for the future of our state. I think it's really important that we're having this discussion on Statehood Day, but I think it's really important that we have this conversation in a way that also highlights the environmental research that's been accomplished as a result of this legislation over the years, the amount of restorations and habitat improvements that have happened over the course of years, but also a better understanding of our natural world. And I know an awful lot of people travel to this state every year to take advantage of that, and we have an environmental legacy to hold near and dear to our hearts, and this helps to continue with that. I just wanted to say thank you to the author of the bill for working so hard on this legislation. I think it's been a couple of years of work, and I really wanted to highlight that. Thank you for doing this. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize the initial trailblazers in this legislation back in 1988 rather. Willard Munger and Dave Bishop worked diligently to get this to the finish line, and that started something in 1988 that we have to this day. Now, I'm a millennial. I was born in the early 80s. This is all I've ever known, and there are people across the state of Minnesota who have only ever known the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And I think that that's really important, and I think that goes and highlights the importance of this legislation, but also what this body can do to make a difference in people's lives. The last thing I wanted to say is that, I think if the people at home that are watching this tonight, this debate, but more importantly, when they go to the ballot box, if these folks renew this piece of legislation, it'll go on to 2050. And that'll produce a lot of new projects, a lot of great projects. I was just looking at the 2024 request for proposals, and I'll tell you, there is a lot of great requests this year. And I know that the folks that are in the discussion on who's going to get the funding is going to really have a hard time. I personally know a couple of people that are friends and acquaintances that have research projects, and I know that these research projects are actually going to have a great impact on our understanding of Minnesota, but also the protection of our natural resources. And so I rise today, and I wanted to highlight one last thing. There's a letter that we all got, and there are a number of organizations that I belong to, a number of organizations that I respect for their work across the state of Minnesota, and I wanted to highlight that they are also saying today, please vote green, just like I plan to do. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I had the opportunity to hear this bill twice because it came through Ways and Means, so we had kind of a different discussion in there, and then the Rules Committee. So there's something that we haven't really talked a whole lot about on this floor, and so I thought I would have a little dialogue with Representative Hollins if she'd be willing. So the one part of this that is completely new that we haven't talked about at all is the community grants. And I wanted to start talking about the Community Grants Advisory Council because it's brand new and it's going to be stood up, and it does have 11 members. And so I'm wondering if Representative Hollins would yield to a question, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hollins will yield to a question. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Hollins, starting in line 4.20 of the bill, maybe I'm sure you've got it in front of you, if you could just let the body know who those 11 members of the new Community Grants Advisory Council will be. That I believe they're going through the grant proposals is their job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative O'Neill. I'm not sure how to answer the question, but there are 11 residents of Minnesota that would make up the advisory council. They haven't yet been decided, so I don't know who they will be.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, it wasn't a trick question. It's right here. It just says 2 members from the Ojibwe tribe, 2 members from the Dakota tribe, 4 members who identify as Black, African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Pacific Islander, or as a member of a community of color. That makes up 8 of the 10. I was just getting it on the record that that's who is the new advisory council. So 8 of the 10 are the ones I just described. And I know when we discussed this in Rules Committee, Representative Hollins, we had asked the DNR, maybe it was even in Ways and Means, but anyway, we had asked the DNR what happens after the advisory council reviews all of the applications. And if Representative Hollins would yield for a question, if you could let us know what the DNR said.
Representative Hollins will yield to another question. The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. So you want to know what the DNR said about what happens afterwards, after they review? I mean, I think they said that, I'm trying to remember exactly what the DNR said, but my recollection is that there is the advisory council that will be created and that will work with the DNR to review and assess where these, how the funds should be set up, what the allocations will be, and a lot of the details of the grant program will be worked out between the DNR and this advisory committee. Does that seem correct?
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hollins. Yes, and so they weren't quite sure because I hadn't put all the pieces together, which sometimes happens when we set up a new program, but it will be patterned after similar to what you just said. And then I think Representative Nadeau really had some interesting points, and he was reading specifically from the bill starting in line 3.16. And he was talking about another change in the bill, which is the prioritization of these grants. And so, again, these are the community grants. This is all brand new. We've never done this before, so I thought we should have a conversation about the community grants. And Representative Nadeau talked a lot about that priority. In fact, he read some of those things into the record. These are things that we also discussed in both of those committees. And, you know, it has things like disproportionately affected by ag loss, building loss, risk of fire, low income, high energy cost, rate of asthma, rate of diabetes, rate of heart disease, low life expectancy, high housing cost, lack of green space, lack of indoor plumbing, presence of lead paint, proximity to hazardous waste and related facilities, particulate matter exposure, unemployment, and there's a few other things too. And Representative Hollins, if she will yield for another question.
Representative Hollins will yield. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Hollins, I'm just wondering, we had talked about this briefly in committee, and it seemed to me as I was reading that paragraph, and Representative Nadeau said the same thing, like, how do you get that information? Like, how do you determine where the high priority areas are that this advisory council will now prioritize the applications coming in?
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Yes, so that priority criteria is criteria that was developed using census tract information collected by the U.S. Census Bureau. And it's assembled in a screening tool. There's actually a website I've got access to right here. And we actually went ahead and used the website to find some of these areas, and they include Worthington, Grand Portage, Carlstead, Harmony, Redwood Falls, Waite Park, Brainerd, Blaine, Shakopee, and right here in St. Paul. So there are hundreds of these communities that fall into this criteria all across the entire state.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hollins. It was just really interesting to try to pair up all of the different parameters with how you're going to actually turn that into making choices and prioritization. And the last thing, if she would yield to one other question, is...
She will yield, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. And Representative Hollins, we did talk about the amount of money we're talking about for community grants. And we had nonpartisan staff kind of talk about, if you remember, kind of what the whole fund had appropriated in the last appropriation year, and then what she thought would be proportional to that. And I'm wondering if you have those notes in front of you as well.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Yes, so I brought more information because I told you I can't do math. So if the voters approve the constitutional amendment in 2024, the new appropriation of 1.5% of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund market value will go towards the community grant program. So the current market value of the trust fund is $1.488 billion. So 1.5% of the market value is roughly $22 million.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, she had mentioned it was 79 million, and of the community grant, she thought it'd be about 23 million, so 22 million is right in there. So that's good math, Representative Hollins. Appreciate that very much. So yeah, between 22 and 23 million is probably what will go into these community grants. Again, that's why I think we should have that conversation on the floor. We did have it in committee, and get that on the record since nobody else was talking about that. And the last thing I would say, I'm not going to ask her to yield, but the last thing I would say is that in the testifiers that came in the Rules Committee, there were a couple phrases that came up over and over and over again, and that was environmental justice and social justice. And yet those words do not appear when you look at page 2.6 through 2.10, when it actually has the language of what's going to be on the ballot. And I know, Representative Hollins, you said that this language was polled, and it polled the best of why it would pass. But it doesn't say anywhere in the language, members, anything about environmental or social justice. And yet that was something that we discussed here on the floor. It was something discussed in committee. And so I think that that is important for members of the public to know, too, that these additional community grants, which will be 22 to 23 million every year, and you heard what the composition of that advisory council will be and what areas that it would cover. It does not say anything about environmental justice or social justice in the ballot question. So I personally will be a no for that reason, because I think there's a little bit more work to be done on this, including what Representative Torkelson tried to amend on. And so I appreciate your time today, and thank you, Representative Hollins, for answering all the questions.
Further discussion, House File 1900. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I'd ask you to vote yes for this amendment, this constitutional amendment. And it's not that often that we actually get constitutional amendments to change our Constitution to consider. And it's also very important when we are considering changing the Constitution that we provide some intent, that the author provides some intent. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the author of House File 1900 if she would yield for some questions.
She will yield for a question, Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hollins, what is your intent? What is the purpose of the Environmental Trust Fund?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. This is an important aspect of this trust fund, and I want to make sure that it is on the record. So the assets of the fund shall be appropriated by law for the public purpose of protection, conservation, preservation, and enhancement of the state's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. That has been very consistent in this constitutional amendment. It's been a part of the constitutional language, and it continues to be a part of it now. Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, if Representative Hollins would yield for another question.
She will yield, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hollins. So it is a public purpose that is your intent to have not private profit, not private enhancement, not personal enhancement, but a public purpose. Is that correct?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is correct, a public purpose, and we understand that many of the projects that are funded through this have a longer term public purpose where we are looking at things over the course of years at times. And so it's really important that we have this as a constitutional amendment because it can't be subject to the wills of, the changing legislative environment.
Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hollins, if she'd yield for another question.
She will yield, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hollins. Is research a public purpose? Scientific inquiry, looking at research, is that a public purpose? As the author, is that your intent?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Absolutely. I think research falls squarely into the area of public purpose.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if she would yield for one last question.
She will yield for one last question, Representative Hansen.
And Mr. Speaker and members, this is actually a very important question because it is something that has confused the legislature since we passed the Legacy Amendment, and that is the difference between substitution and supplement. And so on line 3, and this, although this is in the community grant program, I think it's important for overall where it talks about on lines 3.28, 3.29, and 3.30, that the money appropriated should supplement traditional sources of funding rather than being used as a substitute. If Representative Hollins would yield to answer that question as the author.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Yes, that is correct. It actually, this is something I wanted to bring up anyhow, so I'm going to talk about it. So in 2018, when the funds were rated for wastewater treatment plants, it actually was brought to a lawsuit because of the supplement, not supplant language that is in the constitutional amendment, and they found that it did violate that, and so we needed to refund the money that was taken out for that purpose, which is why we have amended it to not have the wastewater treatment. But in general, the idea is to supplement and not supplant.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, these questions are important because they provide the foundation when we ask the voters to consider this. And the discussion tonight has been looking at some of the grant programs, how we distribute the money, some of the conditions, and I think we even talked about where and how. But the core of this is the trust fund. A trust, the trust. To trust that that fund will be used properly. And Representative Hollins has done a great job as the author here in defining what the trust is so that we can have trust that this money, no matter whether it's spent in the community grant program or through the traditional LCCMR, has to meet the Constitution requirement. And the Constitution language has that trust in it. The question from the voters defines that a little more, but the foundation is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And I think that's the key in this. We're asking for your trust. Voters provided that a number of years ago. I think this is valuable to go to the voters again and ask for your support tonight and for the support of the voters.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, members. Thank you for the robust discussion. I truly appreciate it. One thing I wanted to highlight, because I think a lot of individuals don't necessarily recognize the name Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and maybe they don't realize that this is bringing things to their own communities. So I wanted to highlight a couple of recent projects. Over $500,000 in Representative Hidella's district to reintroduce bison into Spring Lake Park Preserve. $2.7 million to rehabilitate the Mustinka River in Representative Backer's district. More than $200,000 to Representative Baker's district, where the U of M and White Earth Tribal Community Colleges investigated the potential of antibacterial microorganisms in bog soil, which sounds pretty cool. $326,000 in Representative Agbaje's district to address bacterial blooms and toxins that contaminate drinking water and lead to fish mortality. $288,000 to Representative Torkelson's district to help farmers adapt conservation practices to improve soil health. And millions of dollars spent in the districts of Representative Damuth, Representative Doubt, Representative Liebling, and Representative Zalesnikar to build accessible fishing piers so that everyone can enjoy our 10,000 lakes. As you can see, this trust fund is critical to communities all across the state. And with the addition of the Community Grants Program, we can ensure that all Minnesotans, regardless of their background or socioeconomic status, get to experience the benefits from our wonderful, great outdoors. I hope that you can all vote yes on this very important piece of legislation, and I look forward to seeing a green board. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 1900. The clerk will close the roll. There being 87 ayes and 41 nays, the bill is passed as amended in its title agreed to.